Flames consume the building, and the sound of screaming inside almost drowns out the gunshots. Women and children cower in horror as black smoke fills their lungs and the walls around them begin to crumble from the heat. It's a nightmare, hell on earth, unfolding in the previously peaceful city of Waco, as surrounding men in black sunglasses dispassionately stare on. Decades earlier, a black man stands on a hotel balcony in Memphis, getting fresh air and talking to a friend, when a bullet fired by an assassin wielding a Remington Model 760 pierces the man's cheek. He slumps over, not long for this world, as the people around him panic and scream. The man's name is Martin Luther King Jr. These events are separated by space and time, but in the minds of many Americans, they're connected. More specifically, they're connected by a question: can we really trust the FBI? The Federal Bureau of Investigation of the United States has a storied and highly contentious history. They famously took down notorious criminals like John Dillinger. They arrested Nazi spies, but they also targeted civil rights leaders, played a massive role in the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, and in some cases, were actively responsible for civilian deaths. To many people on various sides of the political aisle, the Bureau simply cannot be trusted. Today, we're taking an in-depth look at some of the specific reasons why that is. One particularly infamous event that damaged the FBI's reputation in the minds of many was the 1993 siege between FBI agents and members of the Branch Davidian cult in Waco, Texas. The Branch Davidians began as an offshoot of the Seventh-day Adventists started in 1930 by Victor Houtef. Houtef preached that the Messiah in the book of Isaiah was not Jesus, but had in fact not arrived yet. He purchased a compound in Waco, Texas that he named Mount Carmel, and the Branch Davidians formed a community there, believing that they would be the center of the new world after the biblical apocalypse. In 1981, a man named Vernon Howell joined the Branch Davidians. As he accumulated power within the group, he changed his name to David Koresh and eventually took over as the group's leader. He told the members that he was a Messiah and that his followers needed to prepare themselves for Armageddon and a coming holy war. He engaged in various acts of sexual abuse and misconduct in his community. But as horrific as his behavior was, that was not what would eventually lead to the siege at Waco. Koresh and the Branch Davidians attracted the attention of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, as well as the FBI, as evidence surfaced that he was illegally stockpiling firearms at the Mount Carmel compound. On February 18, 1993, ATF attempted to raid the compound in order to execute a search warrant. The events that followed have been the subject of debate, as Branch Davidians and ATF agents each claim that the others opened fire first. But either way, the end result was a firefight that killed 5 ATF agents and 5 Branch Davidians. After the deaths of the 5 federal agents, the FBI took command of the operation, and a standoff began that would last for 51 days. Malcolm Gladwell described the operation in his coverage for The New Yorker. Outside the Mount Carmel complex, the FBI assembled what has been called probably the largest military force ever gathered against a civilian suspect in American history. 10 Bradley tanks, 2 Abrams tanks, 4 combat engineering vehicles, 668 agents in addition to 6 U.S. Customs officers, 15 U.S. Army personnel, 13 members of the Texas National Guard, 31 Texas Rangers, 131 officers from the Texas Department of Public Safety, 17 from the McLennan County Sheriff's Office, and 18 Waco Police, for a total of 899 people. After negotiating with Koresh, the FBI was able to secure the release of 19 children from the compound in exchange for Koresh being allowed to broadcast a message on the radio. However, that left 98 people in the building. The FBI sent a video camera inside, and Koresh and his followers made a video introducing themselves and giving statements. This was sent to the FBI on March 8th and was intended to demonstrate that the people inside were not hostages, but were of their own free will. Koresh attempted to ask for more time, insisting he must finish writing religious documents before surrendering. All the while, a steadily widening divide was forming among the FBI agents. Some believed that the negotiation was the way forward. Others advocated for a show of force against the Branch Davidians and Koresh. The FBI cut all water and power to the compound, forcing those inside to rely on rainwater and MRE rations to survive. 11 more people were ordered to leave by Koresh and left the compound. On April 14th, Koresh issued a letter to his lawyer, which was his last communication with the outside world. He claimed to be working to complete his final piece of writing and that he would surrender as soon as it was finished and copies were given out. However, the FBI did not believe this to be true, and on April 19th, they raided the compound. Agents called the compound, warning those inside to take cover. The Branch Davidian who answered the phone would not speak to them, instead throwing the phone and the phone line out the door of the compound. The FBI hostage rescue team deployed 2 armored CEVs to the compound buildings and began to pump tear gas into the compound. The FBI negotiator expected the tear gas to drive people out, but they still remained inside. CEV-1 breached the building and began to fire tear gas again as Branch Davidians fired their weapons at the armored vehicle. At this point, the hostage rescue team was authorized to fire military tear gas rounds into an underground bunker. Meanwhile, CEV-2 broke into the second floor of the compound with a battering ram. At 12:07, flames were spotted in the building. The fire quickly spread, with high winds and openings in the structure created by the FBI contributing to the fire. The building burnt quickly, followed by an explosion on the left side of the compound and the collapse of the roof. The fire began to burn out at 12:55, and the entire compound was in ruins. Of the 85 Branch Davidians left in the building at the time of the fire, 76 people, including Koresh and many of the children still inside, were killed in the process. It was a horrific tragedy that left Americans unsure about who to blame. President Bill Clinton said, "I do not think that the United States government is responsible for the fact that a bunch of religious fanatics decided to kill themselves." Others disagreed, particularly given the fact that the exact source of the fire had not been identified. The events in Waco were as controversial as they were newsworthy, drawing a great deal of scrutiny. Some surviving Branch Davidians, as well as family members of those who died in the standoff, filed suits against the United States government. The case was rejected, with the court citing evidence that the Branch Davidians fired first. The controversies didn't end there. From 1993 to 1999, the FBI denied the use of pyrotechnic devices during the siege. However, pyrotechnic gas grenades were found at the scene. In 1999, the FBI spokespeople amended their statement, saying that the grenades had been used but not fired into the building and had not been responsible for the fire. This change in the official story only made the Bureau look more suspicious to those expressing mistrust toward them. The events at Waco have continued to be scrutinized for decades. 10 years after Waco, sociologist Stuart A. Wright wrote about the siege in Nova Religio, stating, "There is no greater example of misfeasance than the failure of the Federal Bureau of Investigation to bring about a bloodless resolution to the 51-day standoff." In the years since Waco, veteran FBI agents have also weighed in on the failures of the Bureau's response. Gary Nosner, the agent who oversaw the negotiations during the first half of the siege, has expressed concerns surrounding the Bureau's tactics. For example, in early March, the team cut power to the compound, threw flashbangs at members of the Branch Davidians, mooned them, and played loud noises to keep them awake at night that included monks chanting, "These boots are made for walking" by Nancy Sinatra on repeat, and the screams of rabbits being slaughtered. To make matters worse, after the FBI successfully got 7 members to exit the compound, the forces outside bulldozed the group's vehicles with tanks. This resulted in Koresh issuing the statement, "No one is coming out, nobody." In Nosner's words, this approach doomed the effort to resolve the situation, stating, "You know Pavlov? You can't train your dog to bring in the newspaper, so kick the dog and expect him to bring you the paper again." He believes that if the FBI had refined its strategy, we might have gotten everybody out. In spite of his criticisms, Nosner was one of the negotiators who unanimously signed off on the use of tear gas on the compound building. For many FBI agents, this tragedy seemed inevitable. Byron Sage, the lead FBI negotiator during the siege, told the Austin American-Statesman, "The biggest problem we had was internal. We brought it on ourselves. We created a crisis within a crisis." He attributed the disastrous outcome of the siege partially to the lack of communication between the negotiators, the hostage rescue team, and the SWAT teams on the ground. Because there was a breakdown in communication, the negotiators' words and the tactical team's actions did not align, causing tensions to rise and possibly strengthening the Branch Davidians in their resolve to stay put. Though he does not believe Koresh would have ever surrendered peacefully, hindsight has made the flaws in the FBI's approach to the crisis obvious. In the aftermath of Waco, the ATF invested in tactical equipment and new weapons, as well as tear gas and automatic weapons training. Agents also trained with the Los Angeles Police Department via the National Tactical Officers Association, with a specialization in hostage rescue, warrant execution, and again tear gas. Meanwhile, the FBI also implemented changes. The Bureau created the Critical Incident Response Group and reworked training so that tactical and negotiation teams could train, work, and live together. Though the FBI attempted to change its approach to potentially prevent similar failures in the future, the damage to its reputation was already done. For many, this proved that the FBI could not be trusted and was an active threat to the American people. This belief was especially strong among right-wing fringe groups who had already begun to hold an anti-FBI position after the 1992 standoff at Ruby Ridge. The events at Ruby Ridge were set in motion when a man named Randy Weaver was caught selling 2 sawed-off shotguns to an undercover agent. In 1991, he was arrested by federal agents for making and possessing illegal weapons. He was released on bond but never appeared for his court date. Instead, he took his wife, 2 daughters, and son and retreated to their home on Ruby Ridge, one of the most remote places in the state of Idaho. They holed up in the cabin there until U.S. Marshals closed in, resulting in a firefight between the Marshals, Weaver, and his 14-year-old son. A U.S. Marshal and Weaver's son were killed in the process, and an 11-day standoff began. During the standoff, an FBI sniper who was attempting to take out Weaver and his friend shot and killed Weaver's wife, who was holding their infant child at the time. The standoff ended when Weaver and his friend Harris surrendered and were taken into custody. The deaths of Weaver's wife and son drew outrage toward the FBI, blaming them for the loss of innocent lives. When Waco occurred the following year, it only radicalized those with anti-government leanings even further. One of the people radicalized by the events at Ruby Ridge and Waco was the Oklahoma City bomber himself, Timothy McVeigh. On April 19, 1995, Timothy McVeigh, who had witnessed some of the events at Waco with his own eyes, bombed the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma. It was the 2nd anniversary of the end of the Waco siege. He later told federal investigators that the bombing was planned as an act of retaliation for Waco. While people were horrified by the Oklahoma attack, they were also newly enraged about Waco and Ruby Ridge. Author Bridget Lebens-Nakos noted that immediately after the bombing, nearly 3 in 4 Americans approved of the actions of the FBI at Waco. 3 months later, however, 2 in 4 Americans disapproved. It was not an endorsement of McVeigh by any means, but a conversation had been sparked, and criticisms of the FBI had been raised, and the genie could not be put back in the proverbial bottle. To this day, civilian militias reference Waco and Ruby Ridge as evidence that the federal government is an active threat to civilian life and that standing up to that threat can be deadly. While the FBI's actions at Waco and Ruby Ridge fanned the flames of rage and anti-government sentiment on the fringes of the far right, the FBI also targeted left-wing and progressive groups in a series of covert projects from between 1956 and 1971, now referred to as COINTELPRO. In 1956, the United States government was becoming increasingly concerned about the influence of communism and the ideology's presence on American soil. As the Cold War waged on, many U.S. government organizations could feel the Soviet Union nipping at their heels and were desperate to stamp out its influence. So COINTELPRO began with the goal of countering the Communist Party in the U.S. But it didn't stop there. Targeted organizations quickly expanded to include groups protesting the Vietnam War, the Socialist Workers' Party, organizations affiliated with the Women's Liberation Movement, and the Black Panther Party. It also included groups like the Ku Klux Klan, all lumped together with civil rights groups. The standard tactics of COINTELPRO included wiretaps, anonymous letters intended to sow dissent and division, embedded informants, IRS audits, and the creation of documents that would, in the Bureau's words, foster factionalism and bring certain individuals into disrepute before the American public. One of these individuals that COINTELPRO set out to specifically target was none other than the pioneering civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. Following King's iconic I Have a Dream speech in 1963, COINTELPRO's assistant director William C. Sullivan responded to pressure from J. Edgar Hoover to target King. He wrote, "In the light of King's powerful demagogic speech, we must mark him now, if we have not done so before, as the most dangerous racial slur of the future in this nation, from the standpoint of communism, the racial slur, and national security." From there, the FBI began to bug King's home and hotel rooms, placing a total of 8 wiretaps and 16 bugs. This was accompanied by IRS harassment, statements from Hoover referring to King as a notorious liar, and 2 days after King was announced as the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, a particularly damning package. The Bureau sent King a compilation tape of recordings of King, including evidence of his affairs. Along with the tape, they included an anonymous letter that called him a filthy, abnormal beast and threatened to release the tape to the public if he did not take his own life. When he refused to acquiesce, FBI Associate Director Cartha D. DeLoach offered to send the surveillance transcript to a variety of news outlets, including Newsweek and Newsday. They also focused their attention on Malcolm X, where they worked to widen the rift between Malcolm and Elijah Muhammad. contributing to the disputes that ultimately led to his 1965 murder. As writers like Gregory Kane at the Baltimore Sun put it, FBI should acknowledge complicity in the assassination of Malcolm X. In 1967, the FBI launched COINTELPRO Black Hate, which focused primarily on King and the SCLC, as well as the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the Revolutionary Action Movement, the Deacons for Defense and Justice, the Congress of Racial Equality, and the Nation of Islam. It established the Ghetto Informant Program, which used thousands of pieces of information from 1967 to 1973 to collect information for the Bureau on civil unrest in the black community. An FBI memo from March 1968 elaborated on the goals of the program. An excerpt includes Goals 1. Prevent the coalition of militant black nationalist groups. An effective coalition of black nationalist groups might be the first step toward a real Mau Mau in America. 2. Prevent the rise of a messiah who could unify and electrify the militant black nationalist movement. Martin Luther King, Stokely Carmichael, and Elijah Muhammad all aspire to this position. King could be a very real contender for this position. Another group targeted by the FBI and COINTELPRO was the Black Panther Party. First founded in 1966 with the goal of ending police brutality in Oakland, the Black Panther Party was known for organizing neighborhood police patrols and providing a number of social programs, including free breakfast for school children, which provided local children with free breakfast before school. The program fed thousands of children and helped to provide a positive image of the civil rights group. J. Edgar Hoover saw this as a direct threat, referring to it as potentially the greatest threat to efforts by authorities to neutralize the BPP and destroy what it stands for. The FBI swiftly launched an all-out war against the free breakfast program. They drafted a fake coloring book under the guise of official Black Panther literature, which was purported to teach anti-white racism. According to historian Franziska Meister, FBI agents in San Francisco told parents that the food at these breakfast programs was infected with venereal diseases. Police officers raided the breakfast program sites in Oakland and Baltimore, and in Chicago, the police took photographs of the children who had shown up to be fed. According to one female Panther who spoke to historian Nick Heinen, the night before the first program in Chicago was to open, the Chicago police broke into the church and mashed up all the food and urinated on it. The FBI didn't stop there either. Between 1967 and 1969, according to the Panthers' attorney, raids and arrests of Panther members cost the party over $200,000, or $1.3 million in today's money, on bail bond premiums alone. Then the FBI focused its attention on Fred Hampton, the Black Panther Party's leader. In 1969, the FBI sent an anonymous letter to the leader of a Chicago street gang called the Blackstone Rangers, claiming that Fred Hampton had taken out a hit on him. According to an internal memo, the FBI intended the letter to disrupt the BPP or lead to reprisals against its leadership, including violent-type activity, shooting, and the like. The attempt to start a firefight between the Panthers and the Rangers was unsuccessful, but Fred Hampton would still meet a tragic end. On December 4, 1969, in the pre-dawn hours of the morning, Chicago police officers raided a Black Panther apartment on the west side of Chicago. They arrived with a search warrant and promptly fired 90 bullets into the apartment with submachine guns, shotguns, a rifle, and a pistol. Originally, they claimed that the Panthers had shot first, but later evidence showed that this was a lie. What the police claimed to be bullet holes from Panther fire were in fact only nail heads. Later analysis of the scene showed that most of the gunfire was aimed at Fred Hampton's bed. Along with fellow Panther leader Mark Clark, Hampton was killed in the assault. He was 21 years old. 4 other Panthers were wounded, and 7 were arrested and charged with attempted murder, though the charges were later dropped. In 2021, FBI memos and reports obtained by historian Aaron Leonard through the Freedom of Information Act and reported on by the Chicago Sun-Times revealed that William C. Sullivan, along with George Moore, the head of the extremist section of the Domestic Intelligence Division, played a part in planning and covering up the raid on the apartment. They personally knew Hampton's bodyguard, William O'Neill, who was working as an FBI informant and who provided the Bureau with a floor plan of Hampton's apartment. The plan was then passed along to the Chicago Police Department, who carried out the deadly raid. By the early 1970s, the combination of financial stress, internal division, and assassinations caused the Black Panther Party to collapse. COINTELPRO remained a secret until March 8, 1971, when the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI broke into an FBI field office in Medea, Pennsylvania, and took several official documents that were then sent to several news agencies. Several initially refused to publish the information, but the Washington Post, after verifying the documents were legitimate, published them on the paper's front page. Lawsuits were filed against the FBI by NBC correspondent Carl Stern and the Socialist Workers' Party. Then, in 1976, the Select Committee to Study Governmental Operations with Respect to Intelligence Activities of the United States Senate, nicknamed the Church Committee after its chairman, Senator Frank Church, began a formal investigation into the FBI and COINTELPRO. The committee's final report stated that the committee finds that the domestic activities of the intelligence community at times violated specific statutory prohibitions and infringed the constitutional rights of American citizens. The legal questions involved in intelligence programs were often not considered. On other occasions, they were intentionally disregarded in the belief that because the program served national security, the law did not apply. While intelligence officers on occasion failed to disclose to their superiors programs that were illegal or of questionable legality, the committee finds that the most serious breaches of duty were those of senior officials who were responsible for controlling intelligence activities and generally failed to assure compliance with the law. Many of the techniques used would be intolerable in a democratic society even if all of the targets had been involved in violent activity. But COINTELPRO went far beyond that. The Bureau conducted a sophisticated vigilante operation aimed squarely at preventing the exercise of First Amendment rights of speech and association, on the theory that preventing the growth of dangerous groups and the propagation of dangerous ideas would protect the national security and deter violence. The committee also stated that while the declared purposes of these programs were to protect the national security or prevent violence, Bureau witnesses admit that many of the targets were nonviolent and most had no connections with a foreign power. Indeed, nonviolent organizations and individuals were targeted because the Bureau believed they represented a potential for violence, and nonviolent citizens who were against the war in Vietnam were targeted because they gave aid and comfort to violent demonstrators by lending respectability to their cause. The imprecision of the targeting is demonstrated by the inability of the Bureau to define the subjects of the programs. The Black Nationalist Program, according to its supervisor, included a great number of organizations that you might not today characterize as a black nationalist, but which were in fact primarily black. Thus, the Nonviolent Southern Christian Leadership Conference was labeled as a black nationalist hate group. This highlights the failings of the program and the FBI as a whole. It should be noted that while COINTELPRO officially ended in April 1971, the Bureau continued to conduct surveillance of various groups, including the American Indian Movement and environmentalist groups such as the Earth Liberation Front. The Intercept reported in 2018, based on documents from November 2014, that the FBI had been tracking the activities of Black Lives Matter activists using informants and physical surveillance techniques. Publications such as the Atlanta Black Star drew the comparison between this surveillance and the COINTELPRO of the civil rights movement. These are far from the only controversies involving the FBI, and the organization seems to be deeply concerned with its reputation. In 2007, a program called Wikiscanner determined that people using FBI computers had edited entries on Wikipedia involving topics such as the Iraq War and Guantanamo Bay. Aerial and satellite images of the prison there were removed from the Wikipedia page on the subject using an FBI computer. It may not be the grandest conspiracy the Bureau has been involved in, but combine small scandals like Wikiscanner with the Bureau's history of cover-ups and spying on civilians, and it's easy to see why there are many people who believe that the FBI cannot be trusted. Now check out 50 insane declassified FBI secrets you didn't know and more FBI facts and stories. Or watch this instead.